Ladies and gentlemen, very good evening to you and a warm welcome to this, the third in our series of Doha debates. Now, those of you who've attended before know that we don't shy away from controversy here. On the contrary, we're looking for it, and tonight is no exception. The motion before us is that this House believes Iraq's neighbours do not wish to see a democratic Iraq. It's a proposition that takes us right into the heart of the deep divisions, the hatreds and conflicts being played out in the region, and, of course, it's in advance of Iraq's scheduled elections on January the 30th. Now, there have been plenty of fine statements about non-interference in Iraq's internal affairs, and plenty of accusations about some pretty nasty and direct interference. So what is the truth and what is at stake? Well, our speakers tonight are no strangers to international intrigue, and some of them have encountered it at the highest levels. Speaking for the motion, Saddam Hussein's last ambassador to the United Nations, Mohammed Al-Douri. We hope he's chosen tonight.
Iraq ambassador. Iraq ambassador.
Absolutely, Iraq ambassador. We hope you've chosen tonight to impart a few old secrets to us. Patrick Theoros, former ambassador, US ambassador to Qatar and president of the US Qatar Business Council, a Republican by affiliation but no supporter of the invasion of Iraq. Against the motion, Clare, one of the best known and most outspoken British politicians, who served until recently as Tony Blair's Secretary for International Development and resigned over the war in Iraq. And with her, Abdel Atwan, editor of the London-based Al-Quds newspaper, a man who keeps his ear very much to the ground, so much so that he once got an interview with Osama bin Laden. That was in 1996, when Mr. Atwan was more famous than bin Laden himself. Let me now call on Mohammed Al-Douri to speak first in support of the motion.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thanks a lot, Tim. At the outset, I shall start with certain premises for the benefit of the discussion. First, the subject, motion, to be discussed today is hypothetical one. It is believed that Iraq, for the coming years, cannot have any form of democracy, due to the fact that the country is under American and British occupation. Democracy and occupation cannot match together. Occupation means disappearance of independence, disappearance of sovereignty, and disappearance of freedom. Each one of these countries has its own specific reason to look very closely to the social, political, commercial development at the same time as they do have a common characters and interests. One, the majority of these countries are not democratic, so any real process of democratization in Iraq constitutes a source of worriness, not only for their political future, but also for the ideologies and political regimes of some of these states. Second, democracy means strength. At least a part of these countries would like to have Iraq as a weak country. Three, a democratic Iraq means resolving in a better way the question of minorities. I am referring, of course, to the question of Kurds. Four, democratic Iraq means the liberation from all kinds of fear and alienations. This would lead to real change, not only in mentality, but also in the behavior of the society. I would say there is no fear that Iraq will be in the near future a democratic country. It will stay under American domination for a while. At the same time, the American influence is present in the whole region. That means the American will watch very closely the status of the balance of power in the area as far as there is oil interest. Thank you very much.
Mr. Al-Douri, a week ago we had a statement from the foreign ministers of Jordan, Kuwait, Syria, Saudi Arabia and Turkey. They said the elections represent the only opportunity in sight along the path of democracy and freedom.
Yeah, I know that. I read it.
You don't believe it?
I don't believe it, of course.
So do you believe then they have actively been working to subvert the chances of a democracy appearing in Iraq? I know you don't think they can happen. But have they been actively working against the possibility?
Openly not. They can't do that because there's the pressure, American pressure on them. But I think with themselves, I think yes. They don't want democracy in Iraq. Unless there is a kind of change in their mentality, in their regime, in their political regime.
So if they don't want democracy, what do they want in Iraq? Civil war? Chaos?
No, I don't think so. They want a stable country, but not democracy.
Let me call now on Clare Short to speak against the motion, please.
Thank you. I'm asking you all to oppose the motion that this House believes that Iraq's neighbours have no wish to see a democratic Iraq. And I stress it's the neighbours. It doesn't say the neighbouring states. It says the neighbours, the people living in the vicinity. I say how you vote matters because this argument that there is no commitment to democracy in this region is used by the United States, supported to our shame by my government, but without the support of most of the people of the United Kingdom, to support the attack on Iraq and the continuing occupation of Iraq. The claim is, as you all know, that the rush to war in Iraq was in order to liberate the people of Iraq, and the occupation is designed to liberate the people of Iraq and bring them to democracy. And this is the argument of the extremist group around President Bush, who try to pretend that the whole problem of the Middle East is that there's no commitment amongst the people of the Middle East to democracy and respect for human rights, and that that's all the cause of the problems of the region. As you know, I mean, you've heard this argument repeated time and time again. And my view is that this is an untrue and outrageous argument, and it's really important that people here don't give it any credence or any support. As you all know, there is a lack of democracy and respect for human rights in the Arab world, but I believe it is because of the unresolved tension between Israel and Palestine. So I ask you, and I repeat, to vote against this motion, because what it implies is that the problem of this region is the people and the neighbourhood of Iraq not supporting the principles of democracy and respect for human rights. And that is a deep untruth and a big insult to the people of the Arab world, who I'm sure are yearning for democracy and freedom, but because of the complexity for the region that flows from the problems of Palestine and now the occupation of Iraq, are being deprived of that right which belongs to all people. Thank you.
So, Clare Short, it's all down to the external world, it's all down to Britain and America that they don't have democracy in this region.
The rulers of the region have to take responsibility for their own actions, but the external interventions have completely distorted the history of this region. Both the desire to control oil, I think by balkanizing the region, and the unquestioning support for Israeli policy in breach of international law, which I think is against the interests of everyone in the region and the people of Israel.
But where do you see
much
this
greater
commitment?
interest would be a peace.
Where do you see this commitment to democracy in this region?
I don't think that the region has had a chance to develop democratic government because of these interventions.
Well, you've just seen democratic elections in the Palestinian territories. You've just seen them choose a new president.
Well, we've seen a limited form. You can't have full democracy under occupation when people are not free to move about their own territory.
Well, the Palestinians are saying they had a free and fair election.
If I may finish my sentence. So it's a limited form of democracy, but yes, I agree, the Palestinian people have chosen Abu Mazen as their leader, and I'm sure they're all hoping that he will be respected and able to negotiate a two-state settlement.
And the neighbouring governments, are they interested in seeing democracy in Iraq? They've said they are. They're backing the electoral process.
Well, I'm not sure support for the elections that are about to take place in Iraq, I agree with my opponent here, is support for full democracy in Iraq. But I don't think these elections will be the flowering of a full democracy in Iraq, I'm afraid.
Does that justify the neighbouring countries instigating insurgency, as the Iraqi government at the moment has accused them of doing?
This is another outrageous untruth, or lie, I suppose I should call it, to be just franker. It's always suggested it was just a few awkward squad, but the whole of the people of Iraq welcomed the occupation and the war, then it was supposed to be foreign intervention, but in all the killings and the arrests, foreigners are a small minority of the people who have been arrested for engaging in the insurgency.
So when Iyad Alawi says we've documents, we've proof that indicate that some neighbouring countries are contributing to increasing the violence in Iraq, you don't buy that?
Well, I think he is largely a spokesperson on behalf of the US administration. There might well be interventions from neighbouring countries, you would expect that, but to suggest that is the cause of the insurgency is completely false.
Clare Short, thank you very much. Patrick Theoros, would you speak in favour of the motion?
Thank you. I slightly take a different tack on this one. It's not so much that there is a ingrained prejudice against or for democracy in the region, but simply that the neighboring states are governed by rational, intelligent people who have their own national interests at heart. The Iraqi interim government will conduct national elections that the US government hopes will produce a democratic government. This democratic government will accomplish two purposes. It will stabilize Iraq and allow us to claim victory as we head for the exits. This has been endorsed by the United Nations and the entire outside world with enthusiasm. Iraq's neighbors, as Mr. Sebastian noted, have all gone along with this endorsement because A, they had little choice, but probably they didn't think it would happen. After all, they will have to live with a democratic Iraq in their neighborhood should it happen, but they're probably hoping or assuming that it can't. Most of the neighbors should have some very strong reservations about a democracy in Iraq. I don't mean to label the neighbors as anti-democratic or as knee-jerk reactionaries. In fact, most of their populations probably want democracy to some degree. Furthermore, 4 of Iraq's 6 geographic neighbors themselves have some form of democracy in their political systems, for better or for worse. But as I said, these governments are run by rational and intelligent men who have a clear view of their interests and those of their states. Democracy in Iraq, in whatever form it takes, whether it happens immediately later, would produce fear. After all, not only is Iraq, a democratic Iraq, something unexpected and unknown in this region, but each of Iraq's neighbors has a special relationship that heightens that fear. Turkey must be terrified of the prospect of a truly democratic Iraq, because one of two things will happen. Either the Iraqi Kurdish minority will move towards more independence, or the Iraqi Kurdish minority playing a role in a democratic Iraq will be able to influence Iraq towards a more hostile anti-Turkish policy. Iran has another worry for a democratic Iraq. That is primarily that Iran has monopolized the leadership of the Shia world for the last 20 years, last 30 years. A democratic Iraq with a Shia majority holding the bulk of the most important holy places in Shia Islam will be a direct competition and a strong competition for Iran. Kuwait has special reasons to worry about a democratic Iraq. Saddam may have ordered the invasion of Kuwait, but he did it knowing that the overwhelming majority of Iraq's population does regard Kuwait as legitimately Iraqi. As a consequence of the 1991 Gulf War, a very harsh territorial and economic punishment was inflicted on Iraq and in favor of Kuwait, and Kuwaitis must deeply feel that a revanchist government could easily come to power under democratic means. As for the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, we see a country that has been paranoid about its minorities and permanently fearful that either Iran or Iraq, as Shia states, could stir up the minorities against the kingdom. One can argue, as I do, that this paranoia is unjustified, but the paranoia exists. The Jordanian Hashemite dynasty, imposed on Iraq by the British, proceeded then to impose a minority Sunni regime. Finally, Syria, in connection with the Ba'ath Party, must be remembered by the overwhelming majority of the Iraqi people as a kindred soul to the regime that ruled Iraq until now. All these are factors that provoke Iraqi nationalism and Iraqi popular resentment towards all their neighbors, and it's the kind of popular resentment that can be exploited by clever politicians. If I were government or perhaps even population in most of the neighbors, I would have a lot of concerns about a democratic Iraq.
Patrick Theoros, thank you very much indeed. The neighbours didn't enjoy life much in the region when Saddam Hussein was there, so why wouldn't they favour a change?
Some did, some didn't.
A lot didn't. You mentioned
Yes.
Kuwait, for
Yes,
instance.
Kuwait didn't.
Kuwait didn't enjoy it at all.
But it is still easier to deal with an authoritarian government than an aggressive, revanchist democratic government.
Why does it have to be an aggressive, revanchist democratic government?
It has the...
could just be a weak democratic government, like many democratic governments, couldn't it?
It could, but I rather believe that Iraqi politicians, if in such a situation, would be easy. And again, we're talking about the perception in the neighboring countries that a democratic Iraq could be one whose population would push it towards setting the bills straight, towards recovering lost Iraqi territory, towards opening the Shatt al-Arab, towards recovering the border areas with Kuwait.
If it was a choice now between civil war on the one hand and democracy on the other, which would the neighbours favour? A civil war could infect their own countries, stir up latent problems among their own populations.
But would it stir them up more than their fears of a revanchist Iraq? Democratic states are not...
Again, I'm quarrelling with your definition of a revanchist democratic government.
I think
what about a normal democratic government? You rule that out?
No, I don't rule it out. I regard it as unlikely simply because any democratic state, any democratic government that will take power in Iraq will be on the heels of 30 very unhappy years.
Patrick Theoros, thank you very much indeed. Abdel Bari Atwan, let me ask you to speak against the motion, please.
Well, actually, I believe the neighbors of Iraq, especially the Arab neighbors, they don't have actually the sovereignty or a sovereign government who can decide for themselves. They are a satellite of the United States. United States actually ask them to support democracy, they support democracy. Oppose democracy, they oppose democracy. So they are not really a government which can decide for themselves. This is one thing. They are moved by remote control from the United States. And to prove that, when there was American invasion of Iraq, all the Arab countries and in a way or another, Iran supported this invasion, and actually they opened their territories for the American troops as a springboard to attack Iraq. So this proves that, they are not actually a sovereign country who can decide. They did not go to Iraq to establish democracy in that part of the world. They went to Iraq for oil. They went to Iraq to have a base there, permanent bases there, to control the oil. If they went there for democracy, okay, I accept it. But it's not that. And to prove that, Americans supported the most rotten dictatorship in the Middle East. The allies of the United States for the last 35 years or 40 years were the worst dictatorship. Look at Egypt, look at Saudi Arabia, look at Libya or others. Most of them is a rotten dictatorship. So they don't have a history of supporting democracy to say that they are going to Iraq to establish democracy. So please, I would like you to vote against this motion.
Abdel Bari Atwan, thank you very much indeed. If the United States is controlling all the countries in the region, as you suggest, there wouldn't be an insurgency of the kind you're seeing in Iraq, would there?
Well, insurgency, actually, I am really amazed when you say that, the neighbor of Iraq sent or support insurgent. The American, when they destroyed and occupied Fallujah, they only captured 20 foreigners in that city. And about 1,200 were Iraqis. So there is no insurgents. There are Iraqi people resisting this occupation. And if there is insurgency, it is United States...
So the interim government is talking nonsense then?
Yes. Because if they deceived us and told us there are weapons of mass destruction in Iraq...
Syria says it's arrested 2,000 people trying to cross the border into Iraq. That's nonsense as well, is it?
We don't know, but they deceived us before. They could give us the wrong information as a weapon of mass destruction. They told us there are weapons of mass destruction and nothing. How can we believe them?
And what signs among Iraq's neighbours do you see that they want to see a democracy?
Well, actually, as I said...
Where are the signs? To bring it back to the motion.
Well, I think, Turkey would like to have democracy in Iraq simply because it means, for them, if it is a true democracy, it means stability, because civil war could actually have independent Kurdish state in the north. And Turkey wouldn't like that. The civil war is against Turkish interests. Iran, they would like to have democracy in Iraq simply because if you have democracy, proper democracy, the Shia will be ruling. Maybe you will have, a Khomeini-type regime in Baghdad, and this will suit Iran, for example. So if you talk about the neighbors, Kuwait, would love to see democracy simply because it means for them some sort of stability.
Abdel Atwan, thank you very much indeed. Let me throw the discussion open between the two sides. Patrick Theoros, how much do you agree with what you've heard from Abdel Atwan?
Very little, I'm afraid. I agree very little, I'm afraid. For one, I find it unrealistic to believe that Kuwaitis assume that the Iraqis are just like them, that the Iraqis bear goodwill towards Kuwait, that there is no sentiment in Iraq that Kuwait is legitimately part of the Iraqi state.
Do you think these elections that are planned are going to produce a democratic Iraq?
I would be very surprised if they did. But that, again, is not the point of the motion, is what do the neighbours want? Are the neighbours trying to prevent it from happening? I don't think there's clear evidence.
Do you mean by the neighbours the people or the government? It says neighbours, it doesn't say neighbouring governments. Don't you think the people of the Arab world would like a future that's democratic and free?
I think
they're not necessarily the same thing, democratic and free, are they?
No.
But people everywhere want to be free to pursue their life, to express their opinions, to see their children have a better life. This is part of being a human being. And I'm sure the neighbours want it for themselves and their neighbourhood.
This morning, the most democratic government among all of Iraq's neighbours, the Turkish government, issued what was virtually an ultimatum to the Iraqi government about not permitting Kurds in Turkmen areas to vote, to insist that they vote in other areas. I mean, but it was delivered in the form of an intervention. There are Turkish troops in northern Iraq.
The whole country is voting as one, so that's nonsense.
But, my point is, look, if you are a Syrian, for example, and you see the American democracy in Iraq created until now, 100,000 people were killed, half of them actually women and children, and you can see the destruction of Fallujah, and you can see all these atrocities in Iraq. Do you think people will like this kind of imposed democracy by guns and by warplanes and by the destruction?
So are you saying they would buy it if America wasn't the salesman?
Yes, because this is the worst salesman, and what's happening in Iraq actually is putting people off all the American values, and they don't trust the Americans, especially when they talk about human rights, when they talk about democracy. This is the problem.
Clare, let's take up a point that Abdel Atwan made. He said asked the question whether the US wanted democracy in Iraq. You served in Tony Blair's government. Did the British government want to see democracy in Iraq?
Well, the British government, Tony Blair just did whatever America wanted and was dishonest with his own government and people about what he was doing. Because he promised us we were only going through the UN, that we were having the inspectors, that war was the last resort, whereas we now know he'd given his word to President Bush that Britain would do whatever America wanted.
So you're saying he had no interest in democracy, just keeping America sweet?
He was just supporting America. He just wanted to keep a close relationship with America.
Patrick Theoros, you want to come back on that?
I do believe there was a strong, misguided belief that we could impose democracy on Iraq, that we could. I certainly saw this reflected throughout the United States at the time. People who supported the war honestly believed that democracy could be...
You kill people to give them democracy.
Well, democracy is messy.
You can't do that.
No, but they honestly believe this.
All right, let me bring the audience in here. You've heard the views of the panelists. It's now your chance to put your questions to our panelists. Please, I see you're raising your hands. I'm going to indicate which questioners I'd like to get a microphone to. Please wait until that microphone comes to you. And please keep your questions as short as possible. A lady in the third row over there.
Is Iraq capable of moving smoothly from dictatorship to democracy?
Well, of course, yes. There is no people in the world who is not capable to practice democracy. It is one of the major ambitions for our life, for our civilization, is to have democracy. But which kind of democracy? Who will want this democracy? Might be imported from outside, dictated by other or by occupation power? No, what we would like as Iraq, we would like to have a democracy, our democracy. We have to change our regime, our system, to have a democracy in Iraq, and we are capable to do that. Iraqi people is a very civilized one. You know, the Iraqi people is going in the history 8,000 years. So Iraq is well prepared to have it, but first Iraq has to be liberated from occupation, and after that, the Iraqi people will decide its future, not others decided instead of him, for himself.
Could I add a comment?
Yes, please.
There is
and then we'll
a
go to
generally racist thought out there, you hear very much in the Western world, that country A or country B is not ready for democracy. I once had a conversation with an Arab ruler in which he said, how do you know that a country isn't ready for democracy until you try it? And there's no reason at all why the Iraqi people, under the right circumstances, given the opportunity to take power, it may be messy, it may be bloody, we may see another 100,000 dead in the process, but most countries that went from dictatorship or authoritarian regime or colonialism did it through a very bloody and messy process. So there's no reason to believe that you can't end up with a democratic state in Iraq.
lady in the second row there.
I would like to address the question to the party who was arguing against the motion. And my question is, it appears to me that the Iraqi people have no choice but to accept the democracy. But to what extent do you think that the upcoming elections is the result of the American invasion, or is it by the will of the own Iraqi people?
Clare Shaw.
I absolutely do not accept that one set of elections that some people will participate in, others won't because they don't approve, others won't because they're frightened, is democracy. So if we're talking about these elections that are coming up in Iraq, they're not democracy. They're a set of elections that are partly intended for propaganda purposes, so the occupying powers can say, there you are, we've got a government that's arisen from the people, and that's the purpose of it. So let's not muddle genuine democracy, where people are really in charge of their own fate and how their country's governed, with these forthcoming elections in Iraq. I agree with you, the elections will take place. Some people will be enthusiastic to participate, others disapprove, others will be too frightened. It's dangerous in that it looks as though the Shia people will participate in big numbers and others be underrepresented, which could cause tension and division, which could exacerbate the problems of the country. I mean, there's some suggestion that there'll be appointees into the parliament for the underrepresented people. So these are just going to be some very messy elections that aren't going to end the insurgency, won't represent everybody. This is not democracy. And they're being designed so the occupying powers can claim that they're in favour of freedom for these people that are being oppressed and killed.
Isn't it even a good first step? I mean,
No.
if the security situation doesn't allow for elections throughout the country, isn't this a good first step?
Lots of those who are not participating in the elections have said, if we can have a negotiation about the end to the occupation, then we very happily. So if there was a negotiation saying, let's help Iraq elect an interim government and they can ask the occupation to end, then the whole country would participate.
Gentleman in the second row, just behind you there.
Most of the people of the Middle East are tired of war and violence in the region. Yet if we put all that behind on election day, and the question is to Mr. Mohammed Al-Douri, as a previous representative for the UN during the rule of Saddam Hussein, do you think Iraq is better on January 30th, 2005, or with Saddam Hussein in power?
Well, I think you have to answer that question, not me, because it is the screen is clear. Everything is clear. Hundreds of thousands of people killed, thousands and thousands of tons of weapon of mass destruction thrown to Iraqi people, and you see what is going on actually. So I ask you the same question. Certainly the situation was better than actually, but the Iraqi people would like to have a better future than before and than what is going actually.
Are you satisfied with that answer?
If you can have the election or bring back Saddam Hussein, what would you do?
Well, you know, I will tell you honestly that this will never happen, because the Iraqi people seeking to look the future, for the future, to build a real democracy, a free country, free of all kind of oppression. What we have actually, what we are seeing on the scene actually is something, what can I say, how can I characterize this? As outrageous. During the past regime, we didn't have this kind of chaos in terms of security, in terms of lack of needs of population, in terms of food, in terms of medicine, in terms of electricity, in terms of services.
I don't want to labor
so it's different.
But I don't think you've answered his question yet.
Sorry?
I don't think you've answered his question yet.
Why?
Do you think he's answered your question?
I'm satisfied with the explanation, but still, do you think it's a good idea to bring back Saddam Hussein or not?
Well, it is not the question now.
But it's a question that he's asking.
It is not the question now. This is no. No, this is not the question.
Okay,
no,
well, we'll record the fact that you don't want to
answer the question. If the Iraqi people would like to have Saddam Hussein again, it's swish. Why? If we are democratic, we have to accept that. But it is not the question.
I think the people don't want Saddam Hussein, didn't want him, and they don't want the chaos they've got now. They want a decent future where they can control their own affairs. So both are totally miserable for them.
Okay, gentleman in the third row there.
We have lived for a long time in the Arab world with certain regimes that have brought a lot of the Arab countries backward. They have so many resources, so many talented people, and they brought them backward. And we keep on preaching on the conspiracy theory that the West is here only for the oil, and they are going to control this for the oil. I think whatever democratic reforms you are talking about, or a process, had to be initiated either peacefully or violently. Europe have gone through a lot of civil wars until they come to the level where they are right now. The United States, the same thing. Now, we are seeing some violent movements in the Arab world, and we're talking just next door neighbor in Saudi. Why is that? You know, we need to understand that, and not only to say that is this going to help Iraq? Definitely it's going to help Iraq. I believe that a lot of people will stand in line, a lot of people will go and cast their vote, feel that they are part of the system, part of the process. We talked about Israel. Israel would not do whatever it can do if we had a credible democratic states around Israel. Then even the United States and Britain would say, okay, we have to respect what the people are saying. But I don't want to take more of your time.
Abdel Atwan, you want to come back on that?
Yes, we love democracy. We like democracy to be actually prevailing in all Arab worlds, all Arab countries. And you refer to Saudi Arabia. Yes, if there is a democracy in Saudi Arabia, we wouldn't have actually the Al-Qaeda, we wouldn't have the radical groups taking place or conducting this kind of violence. We wouldn't have this spread to Kuwait, which has a relative democracy. Who is responsible for that? Okay, we, as a people, actually, we did not push enough for democracy simply because we did not have any help from the outside. When Saudi Arabia and other Arab countries were under the wings of the United States, for example, the friends, the allies of the United States, the American administrations were short-sighted. They did not say to them, look, the danger is coming if you don't actually introduce reforms. Even when the United States start to talk about reforms, they shut up now. Why they shut up? Simply because their project in Iraq failed. When their project in Iraq failed, and when their allies in Egypt and other places say, look, it will put us in trouble, they stop talking about democracy, they stop talking about human rights or about reforms. This is the problem. Yes, we want democracy, but we want our democracy, not the American democracy. We want the real democracy, the organic democracy. We don't want this false democracy which they are trying to impose on us in order to serve the American interest in the region. That's the problem.
All right, you want to come back on that. Can we let him come back?
Well, I think initiating democracy, if we want to use that word, initiating it, either it will come from us, everybody will carry a rifle and start shooting until we come to an agreement, like what happened in a lot of countries, or we have been forced from the outside. But once the process starts, believe me, we will not listen to anybody else, because at the end of the day, I will have to go to the polls and elect who will represent me for my benefit, and then things will change. So please, don't be a part of that process. Be a part of a change.
Do you think the elections in Iraq will end the insurgency?
No, it will not end the insurgency, but that's a beginning, that's a process. Well, shall we sit and say, okay, let them initiate?
But I'm not against elections. I agree with you, elections should be used, but let's not call that democracy.
No. You see, the democracy is very relative in terms. We have democracy in the Arab world, we have democracy in the Gulf. Everybody can ask for an appointment with the Emir and go and meet him. That's democracy if you want to look at it from that point. When we see in Afghanistan a 65-year-old guy waiting for 3 hours to cast his vote, that's a process. This is 1% change, this is positive change, this is what I want. I don't want to sit and say, no, time will come for me. When is time?
Okay, I want to move on because I want to take some more questions, particularly from our student population over there. Gentleman over there.
Well, I'd like to ask two questions. First, to Mr. Mohammed Al-Douri. Do you suggest that USA should leave Iraq right now? And second questions to Mr. Abdel Atwan. If you are against the current government and against the election, then with what you are?
Okay, do you want to take the second one first?
Actually, I am both of them because both of them are wrong. Election, this is not a good start. This is not election. What I want actually to see in Iraq. Okay, just 1 minute. I'm coming. Yeah. What I want to say actually, I want to say the American administration to say we failed in Iraq, we are pulling out of Iraq, we don't want to have permanent bases in Iraq, and we want to let the Iraqi people have reconciliation and sort out their problems by themselves. If they do so, that's what I want actually, we will have a stable Iraq. But as long as they are favoring those people and they want to design a special democracy in Iraq in order to keep Iraq as a satellite state for the United States, as a springboard to threaten the Middle Eastern people and impose its will on the people in the region, in this case, no, I don't want it. To say that we are leaving, we are not going to have permanent bases, and this is our agenda of withdrawal, I will support this.
Okay, and the question to Mohammed Al-Douri.
Well, of course, this is of course I favor in favor of that the American withdraw from Iraq, but this is not me. This is the Iraqi people. The Iraqi people now put all their potential to get rid from Americans.
How's that going to help democracy in the short term?
Sorry?
How's it going to help democracy in the short term?
Look, the Americans will not export democracy to Iraq. This is a reality.
By their departure, how is it going to help democracy?
Look, the Americans came to Iraq to destroy Iraq. They did that, and they have now to leave.
No, but I'm asking you how their departure will help democracy.
Look, please. After that, there's the United Nations, there's Arab League, there's, I don't know, a lot of organizations.
So they'll produce democracy,
so they can help Iraq, help Iraq to build its future in terms of democracy, in terms of economy, in terms of... So the Americans have no other choice than to leave Iraq as soon as possible. Otherwise, the national resistance is there, and they are treating this problem with them.
Patrick Theoros, this is your team member. Do you agree with that?
Generally, I agree. I'd phrase it somewhat differently. Okay. But the problem with the argument against the motion is it's sterile. It is a rehashing of all the mistakes the United States has made, rightly or wrongly, over the last 50 years. The issue before us right now is that there will be elections in a few weeks. One way or another, they're going to produce something that is going to be less than democratic, but is going to produce something. What that thing is going to be, I don't know. But what it may very well produce is a government sufficiently credible to ask the United States to leave. I believe that the United States government today, not the United States government of 18 months ago, but the United States government today very much wants to have a sufficiently credible regime in Iraq that will permit us to depart.
Pro-American, pro-Israeli regime?
Doesn't matter at this point.
But they can't have a democratic pro-American
No, I said it doesn't matter at this point. We have become part of the problem.
Well, we agree on that.
Yeah. Therefore...
Gentleman at the back.
I am Iraqi, and I lived in Iraq during the war and after the war. The question is that the United States couldn't control the situation in Iraq for 2 years, and now the Iraqi people are afraid of going to the centers of elections to elect to vote for or against what they want or they don't. The question is that will the American army have this magic ability to control the situation and provide the good environment for the Iraqi people to go and vote?
Who would you like to address that question to? Patrick Theoros?
Mr. Abdel Atwan.
Okay. I think we know the answer.
I'm glad you addressed this question to me. You know, it's my favorite question. Yes, you know, there are 5,000 polling stations in Iraq, according to the High Committee of Election. Do you believe the American, 150,000 Americans, are going to protect It will be, a God bless to the resistance who are spreading all over Iraq. So if the Iraqi police, until now, they cannot protect themselves, do you think they will be able to protect those people who are going to be a candidate or who are going to cast their votes? So how can we have election in this
so
case?
the short answer is no.
No, big no.
Thank you very much. Can I just come back to you? You've heard our speakers speak in your name and tell the audience what they think you as Iraqis want. Do you believe that the elections are worth holding? Are they worth participating in? Would you recommend that your people take part in those elections?
Nowadays, I don't think that will be a good environment to make these elections. No use of making this election. As I say to you, that people, including my family that are living in Iraq now, are afraid of going to the centers to vote. So how come there will be a good and fair election? You tell me how.
Mohammed Al-Douri, very quickly, because we've got a few more questions and we're running out of time.
I don't think it's a question of the people are secure to go to polls. No, the question
is... But you don't think so, he
does.
The
question is if there is a real democratic election or not. If the people are willing to do this election to elect their representative in the National Assembly. This is the question. And the Iraqi people, now half of Iraqi people, they are saying 30% or 40% of Sunni or I don't know, but all those people from Mosul to Baghdad, to Ramadi, to Baquba, to Samarra, they are not willing to go to polls. So now, if that's happened, are the election democratic or not? Are the election free or not? Are these elections will lead to a democratic states in the near future or not?
Well, let me throw the question back to the student in the audience then. If Iraq was more secure, would it then be worth participating in the elections?
I think yes. The big problem now is the security. Not even the policemen have to control the security of themselves. So how come they can secure other people? So the most problem now is the security.
All right, thank you very much. Gentleman has sat very patiently in the front row, waiting to put a question. You, sir.
Should stop blaming Americans. Americans were involved years ago in Iraq. The track record of American in terms of democracy is always negative. 1950 in Iran, and so on and so far around the world. But my question to you is that, have you ever thought all this fiasco in Iraq today is nothing but the responsibility of Iraqi people who sat quietly for so many years and allowed Saddam to do what they have done, what he has done. Still, Iraqi are dying not because of Americans there, because of what Saddam represented for 30 years. And as long as you people, and in fact, in the entire Arab world, will not face this, questions this particular answer, nothing will be resolved. I mean, why are you expecting? Why shouldn't the American be there?
All right.
Americans were there in 1969 when he took the power.
Okay, can we get Mr. Al-Douri to answer your point?
I completely disagree with you on that interpretation, but you have to ask yourself also why the Americans there, what they are doing in Iraq, what they did already for 2 years, and even before that, when they're imposing sanctions and killing 2 million people. What is this? What are the Americans doing there? So you have not to blame Iraqi people, you have to blame American and the British to be there and to do all this chaos situation. They are occupying power, international humanitarian law, put the responsibility on their shoulder, not on the shoulder of Iraqi people.
I'm just going to take very quickly one last question from our student contingent there. The lady who's sitting second along the row. You.
Miss Clare, does democracy can bring freedom for us?
I think democracy and freedom are interlinked, and I think just to see democracy as one set of elections, where that's not democracy.
All right, we've come to the point where I'd like to ask you to vote on the motion. The motion, this House believes that Iraq's neighbours have no wish to see a democratic Iraq. You have your voting devices. A, if you are for the motion, And B, if you are against, would you please point the devices at the screen behind me and make your selection and do it now. You only have to press once, you don't have to keep on pressing, and I'm going to declare the voting over now. All right. Good. 63% against the motion. Thank you very much indeed to you, the audience, for coming, for our speakers, eminent speakers. We're back next month with an Israeli-Palestinian debate. Meanwhile, our website is up and running. Do consult it. Thank you very much indeed for being here tonight, and have a safe journey home. Thank you.